Well, we've got a little break from the heat. No longer is it 180 degrees out here, but today it's a pleasant 70 degrees, so I'm taking this opportunity to shoot a quick video for you answering one of the hot topics lately, so you won't want to miss it. Stick around. Hi, thanks for joining me. I'm Steve from RV Squared. A question's come up recently about storing your RV, in this case a Newell, inside storage where you don't have 50 amp service. And that entails a whole bunch of different problems. Number one is you no longer have power to supply the chargers on board to keep your batteries topped off. That's a topic of a different video where I've addressed how to handle that with outboard chargers. But the point being here is if I'm going to turn my coach off, I have to think about other things involved. So, for example, when you turn the Newell off, if you turn the inverters off, you're going to lose 120. When you lose 120, you're going to lose appliances such as the refrigerator, which is no big deal. You can turn the refrigerator off, drain the ice maker, and take the food out, which is no big deal. But more importantly is you lose your 120 for your air compressors. And that's the topic of this video. Because the air compressors do more than just give your airbags the ability to level. I turn that system off. When I come in to storage, I squat the coach down, I level it once, and I turn the system off. There's no reason to keep it leveled when you're in storage. It just wastes air. In this case, I've got an outboard air compressor and I don't want to have to put extra burden on that just to top off tanks, to top off the airbags. The bigger issue is your door and your seals. Now, you've got to make sure that your door has air. If your air door doesn't have air, you're going to be locked out. And yes, there is an emergency release. You can open that up. The seals are recommended to constantly be inflated for a number of reasons. Number one is it keeps the ambient air, bugs, dust out of your coach while in storage. So it's recommended to keep those inflated. Valid suggests they're inflated all the time anyway. It helps the seals maintain their pliability. So the big question here is, well, what do I do? Most of you know there's an auxiliary hose bib on the back end of the Newell to connect what's called shop air, auxiliary air source, into the coach, which will basically, by valves, bypass the need to have your air compressors supply your reservoirs with air. So that way you've got your seals, you've got your air door, and by the way, before you start experimenting with this and find yourself without air and locked out of your coach and there's no way to turn your compressor on, think about this ahead of time. Have an auxiliary air source with you, or have an ability or a way to get in and turn your compressors back on, because remember, if you lock your bay to your battery center and you can't get in it because it's locked and your batteries are off, well then you're going to be completely locked out of your coach. So think ahead, walk it through, and we don't have to go through that today. What I'm going to show you is, it's a real simple setup of how I basically got my pancake air compressor, which is basically a Porter cable. It runs 150 psi, and that's ample because you're only going to pump in about 100 psi anyway. The critical thing though is CFM. I bought a cheap one to experiment and I ended up having to return it. It was not enough. So let's take a look at what I've done. All right, this is the old tried and proven Porter cable. It's 150 psi pancake compressor. It's rated at 2.6 CFM. So as I said before, the one I got that was 0.6 didn't cut the mustard. This is 2.5. So, it's roughly, what is that? About 4 times more CFM, and it runs fine. It'll cycle, I don't know, it cycles for maybe about 45 seconds to a minute, and it'll reinflate the auxiliary tank in there, and that's what you're looking to keep inflated, is that auxiliary tank. And just a couple key points to keep in mind. These do vibrate around, and if your shop floor is like this one, it's not level. And so I anchored it. I put a small wire tie back here to hold it in place, because the last thing I want this to do is work its way over to my coach and be running there for days on end, vibrating up against the coach, perhaps scratching it or getting wedged underneath it or getting up against the door even and jamming the door. Over here in this bay is, in this coach, a 2015, is the Xantrex backup charger. It also has my air doubler valve, which you know that sound. Make sure that's off, by the way. And also up here, tucked up underneath, is an air bib. And it's a, I'm going to disconnect this so it's going to make a noise. Okay? It's a male fitting. All right? So the male fitting has to have a female side, and in this case I bought a cheap desiccant air dryer, and I can tell you it's probably not going to last very long. It's pink already. These are cheap, they're disposable, and I put that on a quick fit, all right, so that I can go and change this out if I need to, but it's just an extra measure because this does get very, very wet when it's cycling, and this is fairly dry climate, but that compressed air just gets a bunch of water in that tank. So you got to come in here every so often and drain that tank of the water. And it's best if you have a dryer in this line to keep as much moisture as possible out of your air system. So there you go. This is the connection right up here. And most of them will have a label that says shop air in. And there's the male fitting I was talking about. And that quick connect just goes right in to that fitting. You just connect the hose up, and the hose running across over there to the compressor is all you need. So now that you've got your shop air connected, the next procedure you can do ahead of time. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to shut off my inverters and my inverters alone. Keep in mind that the chassis batteries have not been touched. And in this case, the battery bay is where this coach's house battery rotary switch is, as well as the two breakers for inverters 1 and 2. Okay, there you go. The bottom rotary switch, that's the disconnect for the house batteries. The two breakers up there are for inverter 1 and 2. All you need to do is just turn those inverters off, and you're basically good to go in terms of shutting your inverter system off. So that leads you to the question of, well, why shut off the inverters and not shut off the house batteries as well? You can, but let's go back to the original concept of why I did this in the first place. The reason why I did this in the first place was basically to get rid of that big generator, if you will, of heat, and that's the inverters, because those sit in the electric bay and they just percolate the whole time. So I wasn't really concerned about the 12-volt battery system, because there's a few things on the coach that still have battery power. They just don't have inverter power, which is 120. So that's really what I've lost, is the 120 inside the coach. If I leave my house batteries on, a lot of the coach still has its 12-volt system. Like some of the lights that are 12-volt, they still work just fine. So now, with shop air supplying the coach's air supply, and even with my inverters off, I can come up here and successfully open the front door, and I can turn on my light master, and let's take a look inside, and I'm going to show you how many of the 12-volt lights still work. In fact, they all work. So now you'll notice that even though the inverters are off, all my 12-volt lights work. I like that because even with the 120 supply off, I've still got lights to do work in here, and you know, I can come in the summertime and check on things, and if I happen to need 120, I can go back, turn my inverters back on. Thank you for watching this video. If you haven't already, give me a thumbs up for the like and subscribe, and hopefully you'll get some new content coming your way.